Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Nimbus Podcast, live from the kitchen here at Nimbus Records. Each month, we will be discussing releases and the topics that these releases bring up. Although these podcasts are intended to expand on our releases, expect some really interesting tangential discussions that only these teas and biscuits will be able to enable. This week, we were joined by Callaghan and Hiro Takenouchi, who were great company. Their Twitters will be linked below. Someone walked in on us at the 20-minute mark around then, which explains the sudden random burst of laughter that you'll hear. Please look up, put some support, or explore the back catalogue of these performers at the Nimbus Records website, which will be linked below. There's an accompanying Spotify playlist to this podcast featuring the songs in their entirety. Like, subscribe, and rate us on whatever platform you're listening on. Otherwise, it only remains to say that we hope you enjoyed this first conversation between me, Adrian, and our guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves quickly?
Yeah, sure. I'm Simon Callaghan. I'm a pianist, and I'm here with Hiro making a two pianos recording.
Hello. Yes, we make up this Parnassus piano duo. I mean, playing the pieces by some exciting British composers.
Unknown,
Indeed, yes,
yeah.
and unrecorded.
How did you settle on the composers? Just out of interest.
Well, this is Hiro's
My pet.
pet project.
Yes, indeed, yes. Well, I actually came across his name. In fact, I can't remember how I came across that name, but someone told me about Sherwood.
Percy Sherwood, yeah.
And then as one of the unrecorded greats, and then this lost child of the music history, because he was half, as his name Percy Sherwood suggests, he was half English, but he was half German. He grew up in Germany, in Dresden, and he was an established pianist and composer. But when the First World War broke out, he was, essentially stranded in England, and then he never went back to Germany until he died in 1939. So,
and genuinely forgotten. We don't
forgotten.
really know anything about Percy Sherwood's music.
I actually recorded his second piano concerto from 1932. That was actually the first ever recorded sound of Percy Sherwood's music.
It is fascinating how much unknown music there is. Still, our musical diet is so small. We all understand that concert programs and a lot of recordings and broadcasts all tread the same ground over and over again. But it is amazing, even for us who work in this field all day, every day, to suddenly come across composers who we say, who? Never heard of this person.
And who are actually very good.
Yes.
It's not lost because it's terrible.
Yep.
It's actually really good music.
So watch out for Percy Sherwood.
Yeah,
definitely.
indeed.
I've been impressed today, and first time I've heard it.
That's a good step forward.
As part of the literature program, actually, that we're forming at Nimbus at the moment to sort of promote these less well-known composers.
Well, that's right. Lyrita has always, since it was formed in the 60s, been concerned with British music. And we've decided that as we go into this new century, the thing that we should be looking for are exactly these kinds of composers, British composers, of whom there are many, who have either disappeared completely, as in the case of Percy Sherwood, or are known only for one or two pieces, but behind that there's a huge archive of music that is never performed, perhaps not even published. And of course, if something hasn't been published, its opportunities for performance are enormously limited because you can't get hold of the music. So something that Lyrit will be doing over the next 10 or 15 years is looking deep into what we are missing, what we've lost, and perhaps even publishing some of the scores as well, so that people who do like the music can also perform it themselves.
if you two could say a bit about how you met, perhaps for the first time.
We met, I guess, about 15 years ago. And we were both students of the amazing Jonty Solomon, South African pianist, who's now no longer with us, very sadly, at the Royal College of Music in London. And Jonty, I think we originally came together actually because Hiro was performing in the concerto competition at college, and Jonty was looking for someone to be his orchestra, to accompany him on second piano. So we actually began our friendship, I guess, through two pianos. So it's nice to be still doing exactly that kind of project together. So
curiously,
later,
that repertoire was also a rare one. It was the Madness third concerto.
Still rare, even today.
yeah.
Yes.
So we've come full circle and still, coming back to rare two pianos music.
We were discussing last night how two pianos used to be such a staple and regular part of concert life in the 20s, 30s, 40s, perhaps even in the 50s. There were many very famous piano teams, two piano teams. It's almost faded away now. There are a few people who do it from time to time, but very few who specialise. And Hiro and Simon were saying that the opportunities to actually give concerts of two piano music are now limited by the very fact that concert societies and concert halls that have two grand pianos in are limited. It's a shame because there's some wonderful repertoire, light as well as serious repertoire for two pianos.
I mean, we do piano duet and on one piano together, but I much prefer two pianos.
Playing piano duets is so uncomfortable, isn't it? Because nobody is allowed to occupy the middle ground. So everybody, just physically, yes, you have to be friendly and all of that, but just physically, your hands are actually twisted.
Exactly.
Playing duets is so hard. I do it as well with Martin Jones, and we always leave the duet stuff till the last on recording sessions because it's always the stuff that makes your arms hurt.
Well, I think it's just the sonorities that are available in two piano ensemble are always going to be. Yeah. Well, of course, it's double one piano, obviously. Yeah. So there's a whole world of sound which
it's exciting.
So invigorating to be part of.
Well, Charlotte and I have been working together for about 5 or 6 years, and it's really been a wonderful experience again of discovering unknown music for me. These Japanese songs, they are Japanese texts set in a Western style. In the early part of the 20th century, a group of young Japanese composers were sent out of the country, I assume with government sponsorship. And some of them went to Paris, some went to Vienna, some went to Moscow, some came to England. And they studied here Western classical music. And on returning to Japan in the 20s, 30s, they started writing in a Western style, or a style that European audiences would be familiar with. So if you're familiar with Schubert or Schumann or Mendelssohn or Brahms, you will recognise the musical style of these songs, but setting very important and very beautiful Japanese texts. I think a lot of the songs were originally intended, and Hiro actually can correct me if I'm wrong, were intended for younger audiences, for children, and have subsequently disappeared somewhat. I suppose there's a lot of musical moments, particularly that are intended for younger audiences. As the younger audiences progress and turn to new things, they tend to leave that kind of music behind. However, it is very beautiful, and there's lots and lots of it. The most famous composer associated with this would be Yamada, and he's very well known as an opera composer as well. The interesting thing about performing these songs in Japan, which Charlotte does a great deal, she goes 2 or 3 times a year, she will have audience members in their 60s come up to her at every single concert and say, how wonderful. My mother used to sing this song to me, or I heard this song when I was young. I haven't heard it since. It's so wonderful to hear this music. So we decided to put a CD together containing some of the most beautiful of these songs. It's called Furusato, which means homeland, a very common concept for all musicians. And I don't think there's anything in it that should scare anybody, thinking, oh, Japanese music, maybe I won't like it. It's really simple, straightforward, elegant, beautiful, with definitely a Japanese sensibility to the music, but completely understandable for us. I recommend you listen maybe to the Ice Cream Song.
It's one I wanted to discuss in particular.
Yes.
Listening to the CD, I loved how beautifully simplistic the songs were, a lot of them, and also very very simple and almost innocent sounding.
Yep.
And even though I obviously had no idea what was being sung about apart from reading the notes afterwards, the difference in a pickup in tempo and energy to the Ice Cream Song is really marked. It's very sort of tranquil, sort of sweet, innocent, and then the Ice Cream Song comes along and everything sort of lifts up a little bit more.
But there's plenty of humour in these songs. They're not all serious by any means. A lot of them are wistful. The sense that a dragonfly can evoke powerful memories of home. But this is a common concept for all poetry around the world, something that sparks off a remembrance. I think in Japanese texts it tends to be very concise, very concentrated expression, which is very good for musical composition. Hiro, you want to say anything about these songs?
I was actually here, wasn't I, when you were recording them?
You were about a year ago.
Yes. I remember hearing them. I was obviously not prepared for this encounter, and I was really quite shocked, but in a pleasant way. And but as you said, you're absolutely right. These have this almost nostalgic tinge. Almost all of them.
You're very yearning, very wistful.
Yes,
yeah.
And they occupy a curious place in our musical culture, is because they're not folk music, and they're not the popular pop tunes either. It's just something to do with it's something we actually, as you said, associate with our childhood, and because quite often these songs are taught at schools too, and that's probably how I remember them, and this childhood. But then I still remember this honest, as you again said, these texts are really, really honest remembrance of things that not trying to impress or anything. It's just really simple. But in fact, some of these songs were based on the poems by rather prominent poets of the day.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
and they're really beautiful, but never over the top. So I to be fair, I haven't heard most of those for a long time.
Well, you're about to.
There you are.
So moving on, I'd like to discuss the trio, if that's all right, the trio record that we have, also coming out on Nimbus Records. Something in a similar sort of vein, I think, to what we were discussing before, moving in a fun sort of direction, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, trio repertoire, by which we mean piano, violin, cello, has a reputation along with string quartets as containing some of the most serious utterances of any composer. You think of the Beethoven trios, the Brahms trios, the Mendelssohn and Schumann trios. These are serious, important pieces. And the trio that we're recording at the moment, which is Haggai Shaham on violin and Arnon Erez, his pianist, and joined by Raphael Wallfisch on cello. They have been recording some of this serious repertoire with us. We have all the Brahms trios, and we're about to start doing all the Beethoven trios. But they wanted something which they could present to their audiences, which was more relaxed. And the biggest piece on this new record is exactly that. It's the Dvořák trio, known as the Dumki. It's a series of movements, all of which are related to Czech dances. It's, in a sense, a serious grown-up piece, but in another sense, it's entirely fun, not to be taken with enormous gravitas. And we had great fun recording it, and it's the first time they've ever done anything like this. And the fact that they've known each other and come from the same kind of background musically means that they are able to play this kind of music with the infectious sense of fun that it needs. They pull each other's leg quite a lot. They, of course, are what some people have described as an old-style trio. In other words, this is a trio of three soloists who come together to play trios and spend a few weeks each year doing it. It's very different from the people that have set out to be a trio right from the outset in their careers and do nothing else but play trios. Both perfectly valid, but this idea of a celebrity trio where three soloists have come together and trio is just a part of what they do. This is very much old style, and the first half of the 20th century was full of this kind of trio. I suppose because there wasn't a full-time occupation for a piano trio. And so Rubinstein and Casals and others, Cortot, Thibault, all of these people would come together occasionally to play trios. And it does create a slightly different effect, I think. When I work with what I would call a professional full-time trio, it's different from working with three people who've just come together because it's something they like to do. It's nothing that you could put your finger on and say, that's the difference. But I think because celebrity-style trios are not aiming all the time for perfect polish, which comes with hours and hours and years of working together. They're much more concerned with enjoying and presenting the music, even though there might be a few accidents along the way. I'm not trying to suggest that that's something that they enjoy, but that's a subtle difference, and it's quite nice, I have to say.
Dynamics or group dynamic is a really interesting sort of intangible thing.
Well, I think you could ask the same thing of Hiro and Simon. Do you consider yourselves to be a piano duo that spend all of your time living, working, thinking, breathing piano duo, or do you just come together because there's some repertoire you want to do?
I think for me, the only ensemble that I think works best being a regular ensemble is a string quartet. I've seen a lot of string quartet concerts where the group is comprised of 4 soloists, and in my humble opinion that doesn't work.
It's very hard.
But I think, first of all, if we spent all of our musical lives playing 2 pianos music, we would hate each other and one of us would kill the other. But on a...
we might ask you to elaborate on that.
But on a slightly lighter note, I guess what would end up happening is that we would strive to become like each other, and then the performance of a 2-piano piece would be so incredibly we would be so blended into each other that it would just be like a big version of a 1-piano piece. Whereas in this recording, I think what we're bringing, and what sometimes results in arguments in our rehearsals, is that we're bringing 2 completely different perspectives to the same music, right, which results ultimately, I think, in something which is quite successful, and which so far I think we're proud of, how things are going. And could go downhill from now, but let's see.
Yeah, and often when the composers actually write pieces for 2 pianos, I don't think they expect us to be a completely unified, amalgamated, one.
No, and they're not written. They're generally not written for established 2-piano duos. Yeah, string quartets may have been written for a string quartet, but equally, as you said, with trios, they probably weren't written either. A lot of them for established trios, but some of Beethoven's friends would just get together and play them. So it's a completely different.
That's a whole other and rather wonderful discussion. What is the balance between perfect polish and integration and preserved and celebrated individuality? It's a debate
here all day. Yeah, and I'm not sure we'd ever reach a conclusion.
No,
but.
Moving on now to the Maconchy, the opera in 1 act.
Yes, Elizabeth Maconchy, along with certainly 3 other female composers that I ought to mention in the same breath: Grace Williams, Elizabeth Lutyens, and Phyllis Tate, all working in the middle of the 20th century, were very well known and appropriately supported by orchestras, institutions, commissioning bodies, but whose music has again fallen somewhat out of favour. Hopefully, the new and entirely well we need to recognise that there have always been important contributions made to musical life by women, whether it be performing or composing. And hopefully the impetus that's growing behind that will bring some of these composers back to prominence. Elizabeth Maconchy's one-act opera was first performed in Croydon and is a setting of a story of Héloïse and Abelard. And those people who know the story will not be surprised to hear me say that, of course, the central dramatic element of the plot is the castration of the male character for falling in love with a student and betraying the trust of Héloïse's guardian, and the guardian decides that he should unman Abelard. Nobody knows whether this really is a real story or whether it's a Tristan and Isolde, Arthur and Guinevere type of universal concept. It's a very dramatic opera, very short, very easy to take in. I don't know that it's actually been performed at all since it had its premiere in the 1960s. And this recording is a recording that was broadcast on the BBC of that premiere. So very well rehearsed, obviously, to be given as a premiere, and a super single performance. It was only recorded the once, and we have it. Anybody wondering what Elizabeth Maconchy's music sounds like would do well to start here.
For your family are loving and kind, and I have borne you a son ever long.
A son, Héloïse, my Héloïse.
But in Paris, what of my uncle? Tell me.
You know how enraged he was when he found us lying together and discovered what everyone else knew already. And so I had to remove you out of his reach before he did you some bodily harm.
Never, never, never forgive us.
And I think it's also worth mentioning that it's entirely in English,
Of course.
which is, for me personally, quite jarring, actually being able to understand what people are singing about for once in an opera, but in a very interesting, exciting sort of way. It's really...
Do you actually prefer then to hear vocal music in a language you don't understand?
I'm not sure I prefer it necessarily. I think I'm used to it now, to the extent to which there's this sort of imagining that goes along with listening to opera of what it is about within the story, sort of fleshing it out in your own imagination almost.
Do you imagine it would help or hinder if you went to a performance of a Wagner opera and it was in English?
I think almost certainly hinder.
I
Why?
agree.
Why?
Well, I went to see Barbara of Seville, that my friend was singing in English National Opera, and of course that was entirely in English.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because the colour and the nuance and the feel of the language is so connected with the music that, especially if it's in a slightly below par translation, even though you can understand that if something originally sounded very sophisticated and exquisite and embedded in the music, it suddenly, you suddenly say, now I'm going to pop out for a walk, love. And it's sort of, it's so far from the music.
Yes, but moving on from the banalities which can creep in everyday language, do you not understand or appreciate that a singer might be colouring the musical line because of the words. And if you don't actually understand the words, then you don't understand why the singer is shaping it or colouring it.
Absolutely, yeah, of course.
It's unsolvable, of course. It doesn't have a proper solution. But I think English people, in particular, we're such lazy linguists, because we just don't have to learn other languages. Everywhere you go, somebody speaks English. We have got used to listening without understanding. And we're perfectly happy to listen to Lieder in German and French melody, and terribly lazy about actually understanding what's being said.
I remember there was this book about little stories about Bach, and collection of little anecdotes and stories by someone called Harry Kupferberg. And I remember reading that in his childhood, he still remembers the performance of the St. Matthew Passion in English, and he's never experienced that impact he felt. And since, he's seen a lot of higher level performances, but that performance he will still always remember, he said. And because it was in English, and yes, of course, it has to be a good translation. I'm actually in favour of it, especially because I remember this story, and also another composer who talked about this. It was Mettner, who actually preferred his songs. He wrote over 100 Lieder in both Russian and German, but he actually said very clearly that if it's done in the UK, I think I prefer the songs to be done in English. He actually said that. So there are composers who actually see them that way too. So.
Yes, I think it's terribly important. Although I imagine that there would be howls of protest if you went to a Schubert Lieder recital and somebody was going to sing Schönmüllerin in English or Winterreise in English. But if you get a good translation or even a complete reworking of the text, I think it can be an even more powerful experience, because you don't have to try and remind yourself what's being said.
It's
immediate. It's immediate.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is all about the quality. That's the thing we can agree on. Because I also imagine a situation where you hear a rendition of something intended in German, for example, and there's a sort of syllable sort of crammed in there into a short space or stretched out for too long, perhaps, or something like that, which can grate someone who actually understands the language. But perhaps that's also, from the opposing perspective, an English problem of just an intolerance for actually getting to appreciate these different languages. Maybe someone from a German perspective or some things like that would actually take that as it comes, because it's part of language.
As I said, it's an unsolvable thing. You can barely imagine a French song being sung in any other language, because the sound of the language goes so well with the actual composition. I can't imagine translating Fauré or Debussy into English. German into English works much better. But still, I would like to be able to speak any of these languages well enough to be getting that immediate
That's
impact.
the way to solve it, isn't it?
It's to learn the
So
language.
there is a solution, yes, but the solution is an incredibly a lot of hard work. Just learn all the languages.
Right.
That's
Well,
it.
yes.
Adrian, could you tell us a little bit about the strange forgetting of Elton Hayes, perhaps?
I don't know whether it's strange. It's inevitable in some ways that entertainers who are, have been gone a long time, are not well remembered either by the people who knew them at the time or by the next generation who didn't know them. So Elton Hayes, enormously popular entertainer. I'm quite sure Hiro's never heard of Elton Hayes. Probably you
Sadly,
are far too young to have heard of Elton Hayes.
I'm
as
not
well.
sure, but I also haven't heard of him.
Right.
I'm sorry to say.
There is one track that I might play you that you might recognise. Elton Hayes was a light music entertainer. He sang with a guitar. You could call him a crooner. You could call him a kind of modern day minstrel. He had quite a short career, but very busy one, both in live performances and in broadcasting. Not very much in recording. He also, perhaps his most celebrated moment was when he was asked to sing the minstrel in the Hollywood movie of Robin Hood, Alan Adair. He appears on the screen as the Sherwood minstrel. He made very few commercial recordings, just a handful for a label called Parlophone in the 50s. But he did make a lot of regular broadcasts for the BBC. Again, we're back to children's entertainment. He was asked to make these 20-minute programmes, which he did every week during the early 1950s, about 52, 53, 54. And in our archive here, we have found a complete set of acetates. So these are cut discs rather than tapes of several years worth of these children's entertainment performances in which he sings and introduces songs. French songs, Spanish songs, English songs, folk songs, serious songs, comedy songs, whatever took his fancy. And this now constitutes probably the biggest bulk of Elton Hayes that still survives. And we decided that we would put it out as a series of CDs. Certainly the biggest tribute to Elton Hayes that's likely to turn up. And contained within it is probably his most famous performance, which is of a setting of the Edward Lear poem The Owl and the Pussycat. This became something of a signature piece for him, and it's probably the one piece that I could play you that you might say, oh yes, I've heard that.
The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note. The owl looked up to the stars above and sang to a small guitar. Oh, lovely pussy, oh pussy, my love, what a beautiful pussy you are. You are, you are. What a beautiful pussy you are. Pussy said to the owl, you elegant fowl, how charmingly sweet you sing. Oh, let us be married, too long we have tarried, but what shall we do for a ring? They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows. And there in a wood a piggy wig stood with a ring at the end of his nose.
And that's what he did on music hall stages all around the country to thousands and thousands of people in the 50s. He undoubtedly could have gone on longer and perhaps gone on into the 60s, but he decided to retire. I think he became rather nervous of stage performance. He found it wasn't a natural fit for him anymore as he got older, and he retired completely.
Just waiting for you all the time, feeling blue, wishing for you, wondering when you'll be coming home again. Restless don't know what to do. Just waiting for you.
So that's a wrap for the January releases from Nimbus Records. I'd like to say thank you very much to Simon and Hiro for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Taking time out of recording, it's very kind of you.
Welcome break.
And from Adrian and myself, say goodbye and see you next month.
Goodbye.
Sits